London glowed that night, its lights shining against the dark sky like fallen stars that had found a new home among skyscrapers and historic buildings. In the elegant neighborhood of Hampstead, the culinary and commercial heart of North London, the streets buzzed with that characteristic energy that makes this metropolis such a unique place, a blend of ancient tradition and dizzying modernity. On the exclusive high street, the restaurant The Pinnacle stood like a temple to haute cuisine. With its 2 Michelin stars, recently awarded, and a 3-month waiting list, the establishment had become the epicenter of London's elite. Politicians, business moguls, celebrities, all competed for a table in this gastronomic sanctuary where Chef William Harrington, trained at El Bulli and the French Laundry, reinvented British cuisine with avant-garde techniques that amazed both local diners and international tourists. The discreet facade of The Pinnacle concealed a dazzling interior. High ceilings with century-old wooden beams rescued from a Victorian manor, walls decorated with contemporary British art, and lighting so carefully studied that each table seemed to exist in its own intimate universe. The staff, trained with military precision, moved through the space as if floating, anticipating every need of the diners even before they were aware of it themselves. That Friday night, Bukayo Saka, star player for Arsenal and the England national team, had decided to take a rare break from his exhausting schedule. 2 years after leading England to their historic triumph in the European Championship, that magical night at Wembley that had healed old wounds and created new legends, Saka felt the occasional need to remind himself that life continued, that there were spaces where beauty and excellence flourished, even in a city that faced challenges as complex as those he tried to address through his charitable foundation. He wasn't a man who sought ostentation. Despite his fame and success, Saka had always maintained a modest profile, wearing simple but elegant clothes and driving vehicles that didn't draw more attention than necessary. Tonight was no different. He wore a well-cut navy blue suit with no visible brand, an impeccable white shirt, and perfectly polished black shoes. His only luxury was a watch inherited from his grandfather, a constant reminder of family legacy and the responsibility it carried. After leaving his car with the valet parking, Saka walked toward the entrance of The Pinnacle. He had reserved a table weeks ago through his assistant for a quiet dinner. It wasn't a romantic date or an official meeting. He simply wanted to experience the cuisine everyone was talking about. A small indulgence in a life dominated by training, matches, and philanthropic responsibilities. The maître d', a man in his 50s with the bearing of someone who has served in the world's finest restaurants, greeted him at the entrance. He wore a tailored suit and sported an impeccably trimmed mustache that seemed from another era. "Good evening, do you have a reservation?" he asked in that particular tone that maître perfect over the years, a balance between professional cordiality and calculated distance. "Yes, under the name Bukayo Saka for 9 o'clock, the footballer responded with the same measured cordiality. The maître consulted his tablet, elegantly sliding his finger across the screen. His expression, trained to reveal no emotions, showed a slight furrowing of his brow. "Let me verify, sir," he said, and headed toward a colleague who was at a discreet podium near the entrance. Saka waited patiently, observing the interior of the restaurant. Every table was occupied, diners immersed in animated conversations or contemplating with reverence the elaborate dishes being served to them. The atmosphere exuded exclusivity, that indefinable air that separates certain spaces from the ordinary world. After a few minutes that seemed to stretch longer than normal, the maître returned with a carefully neutral expression. "I regret to inform you that we cannot find your reservation in the system, Mr. Saka," he said in a low voice, as if communicating a state secret. "And unfortunately, we are completely full tonight." Saka frowned slightly. He knew with certainty that his assistant had confirmed the reservation twice, the last time just yesterday. But before he could respond, The restaurant's revolving door activated, giving way to a businessman accompanied by two elegantly dressed women. "Mr. Thompson, welcome," exclaimed the same maître, instantly transforming. The polite coldness had turned into genuine warmth. "Your table is ready, of course, the usual one by the window." The newcomer, evidently a regular at the place, greeted the maître with familiarity before entering the restaurant without even a glance towards Saka. He didn't seem to have a reservation, or at least it hadn't been necessary to verify it. The situation became crystal clear to Saka. It wasn't the first time he had experienced this type of subtle discrimination, this veiled rejection behind administrative excuses. Perhaps his appearance had triggered similar situations in the past, though less frequently since he had become such a visible public figure. But tonight, he hadn't come as a celebrity footballer. There were no bodyguards or official protocols signaling his position. For a brief moment, Saka considered formally identifying himself, mentioning his achievements, exerting the type of pressure that his position allowed. But something inside him immediately rejected that idea. If they accepted him now, it would be out of fear or interest, not because they recognized in him the human being worthy of respect that any person deserves to be, regardless of their origin or appearance. "I understand," he said simply, with a calmness that surprised the maître himself. "Have a good night." Without adding more, he turned around and left the restaurant, retrieved his vehicle, and drove away from Hampstead. As he drove through the city's nighttime avenues, an idea began to form in his mind. It wasn't an idea born of resentment or desire for revenge, but something much more constructive, a vision that would transform that small personal rejection into something with the potential to change many lives. 3 months later, in a central area of North London, not too far from Hampstead but distant enough to belong to a different world, renovation works began on an old Art Deco building from the 1930s. The property, abandoned for decades, had been acquired by a newly created foundation, Bridges, officially chaired by Bukayo Saka, the footballer's sister. Rumors began soon. There was talk of a restaurant, but not just any restaurant. Neighbors watched with curiosity the parade of characters visiting the construction site, renowned chefs, famous architects, but also, surprisingly, social workers, educators, and even some young people who clearly came from the most marginalized areas of the city. Meanwhile, at the Pinnacle, things weren't going well. A journalistic investigation had revealed systematic discriminatory practices in customer selection. Several anonymous testimonies from former employees confirmed that there was an unwritten policy of filtering reservations based on names or undesirable profiles. The scandal had caused a wave of cancellations, and the restaurant, previously impossible to book, now struggled to fill its tables. 6 months after the incident with Saka, Bridges opened its doors to the public. It wasn't just a restaurant, but a revolutionary concept that would soon capture national and international attention. The place operated on 2 levels. In the mornings, it was a culinary and service school for young people from marginalized areas, many of them rescued from gangs or at-risk situations. They received top-level professional training, imparted by some of the country's best chefs and hospitality professionals, all donating part of their time to this project. In the evenings, Bridges transformed into a high-end restaurant where these same young people, supervised by their mentors, put into practice what they had learned. The menu, a celebration of Britain's culinary diversity, incorporated both traditional techniques and contemporary innovations, with special emphasis on the fusion that immigration has brought to British cuisine. Each dish told a story, frequently linked to the cultural roots of the students themselves. The economic concept was equally innovative. Half the tables were offered at prices comparable to traditional fine dining, allowing the project to be sustainable. The other half was reserved for a special program, meeting tables, where diners from different social strata shared a table and experience, paying according to their means. A banker might find himself dining alongside a craftsman from Tottenham or a public school teacher, creating unlikely dialogues in one of the most socio-economically segregated cities in the world. The culinary direction of Bridges had been entrusted to chef Diana Williams, a prodigy from East London whose restaurant heritage had revolutionized British comfort food. Diana, daughter of Jamaican immigrants, had overcome countless obstacles to make her way in a world dominated by men and urban elites. Her personal story resonated with the mission of the place. "This isn't a charity project," she explained to journalists during the opening. "It's a space of excellence where we demonstrate that talent is distributed evenly throughout society, though opportunities are not. Our students don't ask for compassion, but for an opportunity to prove their worth." The success was immediate and overwhelming. Culinary critics praised not only the quality of the food, but also the impeccable service offered by young people who, just months before, had never set foot in a luxury restaurant. The meeting tables became a sensation, with waiting lists of both wealthy diners and people of limited means, all eager to participate in this unique experience. Bukayo Saka never appeared publicly linked to the project. His participation was limited to discreet visits, frequently in the kitchen, where he conversed with the students and tasted new dishes. He preferred to remain in the shadows, allowing the project to shine on its own merits. One afternoon, almost a year after the opening of Bridges, Saka was supervising a food safety techniques class for students when one of the waiters nervously approached him. "Mr. Saka," said the young man, a former gang member who now stood out for his elegance in serving, "there's someone who insists on speaking with you, says it's urgent." In the small office adjacent to the kitchen, Saka found himself face to face with a familiar figure, the maître d' from the Pinnacle, the same man who had denied him entry that night. His usual elegance had given way to a more tired appearance, though his posture remained impeccable. "Mr. Saka," he began with evident discomfort, "I've come to present my personal apologies for what happened that day. I have no valid excuses to offer." Saka observed the man in silence, evaluating his sincerity. "After the scandal," continued the maître, "the restaurant changed management, but the new direction decided to dispense with my services. After 30 years in the profession, I find myself unemployed and with a tarnished reputation. I'm sorry about your situation," Saka responded with genuine empathy. "But you'll understand that actions have consequences." "I understand perfectly," the man nodded. "I'm not here to ask for mercy. I'm here because I've followed with admiration what you've created in this place, and I want to offer you something that may have value: my experience." Saka looked at him with surprise. 30 years in the profession have given me knowledge that could be useful for these young people," he explained. "I'm not asking for a position of responsibility or an important salary. Just an opportunity to redeem myself, to use my experience in something that really matters." The silence that followed weighed with all the implications of that proposal. Finally, Saka spoke. "Our project is called Bridges for a reason, Mr. Hamilton," he said, surprising the Metro by knowing his surname. "We believe it's always possible to build bridges between people, between worlds that seem irreconcilable. Your experience would be valuable, no doubt, but even more valuable would be the lesson it would convey to our students, that we all deserve a second chance, that we can all change and grow." And so it was that Richard Hamilton, former maitre d' of one of London's most exclusive restaurants, became an instructor of protocol and service at Bridges. His encyclopedic knowledge of etiquette and meticulous attention to detail perfectly complemented the warmer, more human approach that characterized the project. Over time, Hamilton experienced a personal transformation as profound as that of the young people he now mentored, discovering a purpose that had been absent during his decades serving the elite. Bridges continued to grow in scope and impact. Soon, sister projects emerged. a bakery that recovered traditional British techniques, a specialized shop for locally produced artisanal foods, even a publishing house that published cookbooks documenting the immense culinary diversity of the country, giving voice to traditional cooks from immigrant communities. 2 years after the inauguration, during a benefit gala organized to expand the program to other cities, Bukayo Saka discreetly observed from a corner how the students of the first generation, now graduates, confidently directed an event that brought together personalities from all walks of life: politicians, entrepreneurs, artists, but also community leaders, artisans, and traditional cooks. A young woman approached him, serving a glass of craft gin. It was Layla, one of the first students, originally from Hackney, whose story of overcoming had inspired many. From victim of domestic violence to respected sous chef who now received offers from international restaurants. "You know something, Mr. Saka," she said with a serene smile. "When I came here, I thought I would learn to cook for rich people. But what I really learned was to see myself as someone valuable, someone with something important to offer to the world." Saka nodded, moved by the transformation of that young woman who had arrived at the program with her gaze downcast and shoulders hunched, as if trying to disappear. "And something else," she added. "I learned that when someone closes a door on you, sometimes it's not to block your path, but so that you look for a bigger door, one that allows many more to enter with you." As Layla walked away to continue her service, Saka reflected on that night at the Pinnacle. And what had then seemed like a humiliating rejection, a small personal injustice, had transformed into the catalyst for something much bigger than himself. Something that was gradually changing not only individual lives, but the way a deeply divided city saw itself. "Sometimes," thought Saka, as he watched the room full of people who in any other context would never have met, "our most painful failures contain the seeds of our most significant achievements." At a nearby table, the owner of a restaurant chain conversed animatedly with a vegetable producer from a small urban farm in Brixton. At another, a foreign diplomat learned about traditional fermentations from an elderly Pakistani woman. And at the bar, Richard Hamilton passionately explained the subtleties of perfect service to a group of new students, his eyes bright with an enthusiasm that his years at the Pinnacle had never awakened. Bridges had become much more than a restaurant or a school. It was a living laboratory where a fragmented society rehearsed new ways of meeting, recognizing each other, celebrating both their differences and their shared humanity. 3 years after that night when he was denied entry to a restaurant, Bukayo Saka had created a space where no one would ever be rejected because of their name, appearance, or origin. A place where excellence and inclusion not only coexisted, but strengthened each other. The story of Bridges began to be replicated in other cities in the UK and eventually in other countries. The model demonstrated that another type of gastronomy was possible, one that not only fed bodies, but nourished the social fabric that created real opportunities and that built bridges where before there were only walls. When years later people asked Saka about the origin of this transformative project, he used to respond with a quiet smile. Sometimes the best response to a no is to create your own yes, one so powerful that it benefits not only yourself, but an entire community. And so, that rejection at an exclusive restaurant, a small act of discrimination that could have remained a bitter anecdote, had transformed into a silent revolution that demonstrated plate by plate, conversation by conversation, that a more just and less fragmented society was not only desirable, but possible. Because sometimes the doors that close on us are not the end of the road, but the beginning of a wider path, one that allows many to walk alongside us toward a brighter destination than we would have reached alone. 4 years after opening Bridges, another significant moment arrived that would expand the project's impact even further. The prestigious James Beard Foundation, in an unprecedented move, decided to hold its annual awards ceremony outside the United States for the first time, choosing London as its host city. Even more surprisingly, they selected Bridges as the venue. We want to recognize not just culinary excellence, but also social innovation in the gastronomic world, explained the foundation's director during the announcement. What's happening at Bridges represents the future of hospitality, inclusive, sustainable, and community-focused. The preparation for this event mobilized the entire Bridges team. Former students who had gone on to open their own restaurants or work in prestigious establishments across Europe returned to volunteer. The current class of students, now over 50 young people from disadvantaged backgrounds across London, saw this as their defining moment, an opportunity to serve and impress the world's culinary elite. On the night of the ceremony, Bukayo Saka stood at the entrance, welcoming guests alongside Richard Hamilton, who had transformed into an essential pillar of the organization. The former maitre d', once the face of exclusion, had become the embodiment of the second chances that Bridges represented. Among the arriving guests, a particular figure caught Saka's attention. Chef William Harrington, the culinary director of the Pinnacle, during that fateful night years ago. After the discrimination scandal, he had left London for several years, working in Singapore and Tokyo. Now he was back, his restaurant reinvented with a new concept and approach. When he reached the entrance, there was a moment of recognition between him and Saka. The chef hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Saka," he finally said, "I don't know if you remember me, but..." "I remember," Saka replied calmly. Harrington nodded, accepting the acknowledgement. "What you've built here, it's extraordinary. Not just the food, which I've heard is remarkable, but the whole concept. It's making all of us in the industry rethink our approach." "That was the intention," Saka said, "not to create another exclusive space, but to reimagine what a restaurant can be in society." "I've learned my lesson," Harrington continued. "My new place, we're implementing a diverse hiring policy, scholarship programs for underprivileged youth interested in culinary arts. It's nowhere near what you've accomplished, but it's a start." Saka offered his hand, which the chef gratefully shook. That's how change happens. One restaurant at a time, one chef at a time, one meal at a time. Later that evening, as the award ceremony progressed, Saka was called to the stage, something he hadn't anticipated. The foundation was presenting a special award, the Humanitarian Innovation in Gastronomy Award, created specifically to honor what Bridges had accomplished. Standing at the podium, facing the luminaries of the culinary world, Saka felt a moment of profound reflection. The journey from rejection to this stage had been unexpected, filled with challenges but also immense rewards. "I never intended to enter the restaurant business," he began, his voice calm but carrying throughout the hushed room. "A chance incident, being turned away from a restaurant despite having a reservation, could have ended as nothing more than an unpleasant memory. But that night, driving home, I realized something. The power to change systems often comes from those who have been excluded by them." He gestured around the restaurant, to the young staff standing proudly in their uniforms, to the graduates who had returned to support the event. "Bridges isn't my achievement. It belongs to every young person who came through these doors believing they had no future and discovered not just culinary skills, but their own worth. It belongs to mentors like Richard Hamilton, who showed that it's never too late to redefine your life's purpose. It belongs to Chef Diana Williams, who understood that excellence and inclusion aren't opposing values, but complementary ones. As he continued his speech, cameras panned across the room, capturing the emotional responses of culinary stars who had dedicated their lives to the pursuit of Michelin stars and critical acclaim, now visibly moved by a different kind of achievement. The true measure of a great restaurant isn't found in its exclusivity, but in its impact. Not in how many people it keeps out, but in how many lives it transforms. Not in the walls it builds, but in the bridges it creates. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for Saka or for bridges, but for a new vision of what the culinary world could become. A place where gastronomy served not just as pleasure for the privileged few, but as a force for social cohesion and opportunity. In the years that followed, the Bridges model spread not just throughout the UK, but globally. From Nairobi to New York, Sydney to São Paulo, restaurants inspired by its principles opened their doors, each adapted to local cultures and challenges, but sharing the same fundamental vision: that food could be a bridge between divided communities, that restaurants could be engines of social mobility, that excellence and inclusion could reinforce rather than contradict each other. For Bukayo Saka, whose football career eventually ended as all athletic careers must, Bridges became his most enduring legacy, more meaningful than any trophy or sporting achievement. What had begun as a response to a painful rejection had evolved into a global movement that was quietly reshaping one of the world's oldest industries. And on quiet evenings, when he sat at the communal table in the original Bridges restaurant in North London, watching students from the newest class confidently serving diners from all walks of life, he would sometimes recall the words of his grandmother, spoken to him as a child facing playground discrimination. When they build walls to keep you out, don't waste your energy trying to break them down. Instead, build something so beautiful on your side that they tear down the walls themselves to see what you've created. In Bridges, he had built exactly that, something so beautiful that it was changing the very industry that had once excluded him, not through confrontation, but through inspiration. And perhaps that was the most powerful response possible to discrimination, not to demand inclusion in spaces that excluded you, but to create better, more inclusive spaces that eventually made the exclusive ones obsolete. As the 5th anniversary of Bridges approached, a small envelope arrived at Saka's office. Inside was an invitation, elegant, understated, to dine at the Pinnacle, now under completely new management and ownership. A handwritten note accompanied it. "We would be honored if you would give us the opportunity to show how your example has transformed us." Saka smiled, placing the invitation on his desk. He hadn't set foot in that restaurant since that night 5 years ago. Perhaps now it was time, not to revisit the past with bitterness, but to acknowledge how far both he and the culinary world had come. Because in the end, bridges have to connect both sides to fulfill their purpose. And sometimes, the final step in building a bridge is being willing to walk across it yourself.